Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on this nomination. I tell you about weaponizing the IRS. I think we saw that the last 4 years by the Biden administration. Against different groups and church groups, parents, all sorts of things. The IRS was weaponized. And I'm just going to ask you about restoring the credibility of the IRS, which I thought lost a lot of credibility during the last 4 years under Joe Biden and the Democrat control. So I think very few agencies in Washington are as present in the lives of working families as the IRS is. When you came to visit with me, I told you my concerns and the concerns of the people of Wyoming, that the IRS is the most powerful, but yet what we've seen in the past, the least accountable of the agencies of the government. So under the Biden administration, the president's really shifted from helping people understand our taxes to presuming everybody was breaking the law, that we were all a bunch of crooks. They wanted to add, what was there, 87,000 IRS agents to shake down small businesses, because even the Congressional Budget Office said, yeah, if you add all these more IRS agents, then they're going to bring in that much more money, because they're going to be out there auditing small businesses and going after families. And you know, in Wyoming, I regularly hear from folks, they're just concerned about any dealings they have with the IRS. And if they don't hear from them, that's better, because these are honest taxpayers. They want to pay what they owe. They want to make sure that when they have a question, they can get an answer. And I think too often, if they call the IRS repeatedly, they're unable to get anybody to answer the phone or helping them comply, or saying, yeah, this is a number you can rely on and you pay this and it's fair. So, you know, the IRS's audit notices don't seem to be delayed, but their answers seem to be delayed. But, you know, this hiring of thousands of new agents to investigate taxpayers really, I think, set the IRS even further away from the American people in terms of an agency that they trust. So, you know, if confirmed, you could just talk a little bit about how you hope to restore the credibility of the IRS with the American people.
And thank you for the question, and thank you for the time in your office. You know that my wife and her family have deep ties. That's where she was raised, out there in Wyoming. And but I think that my three most important things at the IRS are fairness, fairness, and fairness. I think you have to be fair to the taxpayers, but you also have to have your employee partners that are going to work with them and not be intimidated by one or the other. And when you talk about calling the IRS and getting information, I mentioned earlier when I did talk radio for 6 years, there wasn't a week that went by that I didn't say you could call the IRS 5 days a week with the same question to get 6 different answers. And unfortunately, that happens still today. I don't know how to prepare for something like this. I mean, my thought was go back and watch old commissioner hearings, for Senate approval of people that have been nominated to be commissioner of the IRS, because I thought that it was important to and it's the same thing over and over and over for all these years, whether it's technology, whether it's taxpayer fairness, heavy-handed investigations of people. And let's bring back common sense, as I told, I think it was Senator Young a while ago, that let's bring back common sense to the IRS and stay in constant communication with the senator's offices, with the Congress's office. And when I just left Congress 2.5 years ago, I want people in my office to be able to sit in with you all when you're developing these laws. So once it's done, you don't have to spend 6 or 10, 12 months deciding what it meant, because that's what a lot of these problems are today that we've been discussing, or something goes over to the IRS and it takes them forever to put out guidance on it. And it's kind of like the king's horsemen roll into town and they jump off the horse and they roll out the scroll, and this is this week's edicts. And they roll it back up and go out of town, come back 3 weeks later and roll out another scroll with this week's edict that they're deciding over there. So I think communication is number one. And I've always been a pretty good communicator. And I want to have a very open door policy. And we were talking about Charles Rossetti earlier, and he said the first thing he did at the IRS, he went down there and all the doors were solid. You couldn't see anybody in their office. He said, go get me a stopper, rubber stopper. And he propped his door open from that day on so that people could have accessibility to him and get in. And I'm going to improve on Charles' system. I'm going to have anybody that wants to get on my schedule every morning for 90 minutes before the place opens to hear their concerns, to hear how we can treat taxpayers better and not be heavy-handed. We got to collect, what do we collect, 96% of the income in this country through the IRS, so it's a pretty important agency. And I know that, you know, the position I am, it's, you know, not what everybody aspires to be, but through my years on the radio and everything, all the issues that I knew people had with the IRS, and when I was at Congress for 12 years, that was a large part of our constituent services.
Let me have one last question, and it's on protecting taxpayer data. And people are very concerned about their own private information. Last answer, you said you'd worked on the word intimidation. People feel intimidated, and especially their worry is that their data may get out there, information that they don't want shared with anybody, and it's because of some hacking or something has in the IRS. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's vitally important. 6103 is the longest section in the IRS code, and I think we have to bend over backwards to do everything we can possibly do to protect that data.
Thank you. Thank you.